attacks. ISIS now has demonstrated great capability beyond the caliphate. Before they were focused on the caliphate itself, now we've seen 3 external operations in just a matter of weeks. To me, it's very disturbing. The mastermind of the Paris attacks, Mr. Aboud, recently bragged about traveling to and from the conflict zone without getting caught. And recently he was quoted in Dabiq magazine, which is the ISIS publication, basically saying, quote, "I was able to leave and come despite being chased by so many intelligence agencies. My name and picture were all over the news, yet I was able to stay in their homeland, plan operations against them, and leave safely when doing so became necessary." ISIS is blatantly seeking to exploit security gaps into the West. They are also looking at refugee routes as a pathway for the jihadists. And in fact, ISIS in their own words stated that they will exploit the refugee process to infiltrate the West. And indeed, one of the Paris attackers, if not 2, we now have found were exploiting the refugee process to get in to Paris to perpetrate the devastating attacks. FBI Director Comey recently testified before my committee, basically saying that we can query our databases until the cows come home, but nothing will show up because we have no record of them. Yesterday, I introduced a bill that will put the brakes on this Syrian refugee program until the FBI Director, the DNI, and Secretary of Homeland Security can demonstrate to us that these individuals can be properly vetted and that they do not pose a threat to this country. My question first, Mr. Olson, is we are a compassionate nation, but we also need to protect the lives of Americans. Do you agree that before any Syrian refugees are brought into this country, that Congress and the American people must be assured that first they can be properly vetted, and second, do not pose a national security risk to the United States?
Mr. Chairman, certainly that proposition is accurate and true, and I agree with it. In other words, that the vetting process that is in place for any individual coming here through the refugee program needs to be as stringent as possible, and all possible assurances need to be in place that the person doesn't pose a threat. I think the longer answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, is that any process is going to include some risk. So it is impossible to eliminate all risk for every single person coming into this country. That's just a fact of any process like this. But the process that's in place for these refugees is quite extensive, and as you pointed out earlier during the opening statements, involves multiple layers.
Well, you know, in the briefings that we've had, we have if you don't have information on the individuals, and you don't know who they are, it's difficult to vet them. I think we would like better assurances. General Keane, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know how the United States of America can possibly say no to people who are pouring out of that country, given the horror of what's taken place and given our contribution to that horror, frankly, when we had significant opportunities to create some huge momentum against the Assad regime. And for 4+ years, he's been marauding over that population, killing 250,000, creating 11 million displaced. And some of those obviously have the opportunity to come here. I'm absolutely convinced that you're doing the right thing by pausing and making certain that the Congress takes a look at the executive branch's plans and makes certain that it's reasonable what we're doing in terms of the vetting process. We have had 3 million people come here since the 70s. We've had 1 million come here since 9/11, all seeking political asylum. This is who we are. We can manage this thing. And listen, some of the voices that are out there about this are playing right into ISIS' hands. When we talk about, let's only take Christians, I mean, that's a horrific statement. That is playing right into ISIS. This is what ISIS wants. ISIS wants fragmentation between Muslims and non-Muslims. And that's an irresponsible statement to make. We are a country with Muslims in it. And why wouldn't we welcome Muslims and others from around the world like we've always done who are being persecuted? We didn't care about their religion or their nationality. What we cared about is they were humans running from suffering and death, and there was a home for people like that in America. Come on, this is America. I mean, we can do this, right? We're smart enough to figure out how to bring thousands of people into this country and make sure they're not going to hurt us. Anyway.
Let me, and we will continue to have this refugee crisis until the root problem is resolved, and that is a conflict in Syria. What are your thoughts, General, on the Article 5 invocation potential with France, what the role of NATO could be with respect to Syria, and now with Russia in the region further complicating the issue? How do you see the path forward?
You asked that of me, Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think the NATO issue is largely France's decision. I don't think we should have an advocacy for it except to support it if they make the case for it. I mean, clearly, what we have looked at terrorism in the past, and particularly in NATO countries in Europe, it has grown out of their own countries by their own citizens largely. What makes this different is that there is the Islamic State, which is motivating, inspiring, and in this particular case, as Director Olson said, may in fact have been directing it. That does change it, I believe, in terms of Article 5, and they certainly have the right to invoke it. I don't expect much from the Europeans, to be quite frankly, about this. I mean, I think the Europeans have lost national will, even to fight for themselves, much less for somebody else. And I think the French will stand up and do what they need to do. Just our British friends, for example, just think about this. The Islamic State has declared itself, and it's the border between Syria and Iraq does not exist anymore. And the Brits are attacking in Iraq but not attacking in Syria. I mean, what an absurdity that is. And not going after the enemy that's declared itself the Islamic State. I'm not hopeful that NATO will do much of anything here, frankly.
And quick question and a short answer. The administration seems to be taking its eye off the ball in Syria, and now we're in a mess right now. To what extent do you think the Iran negotiations had any influence on our inability to deal with Assad and the Syrian situation?
I think they have everything to deal with perpetuating the civil war in Syria. I think it has always been the elephant in the room. When many of the moderate rebels came here in 2011, that's when they began, when the war began, and they were seeking assistance, and the administration was saying no. They met, probably some of you, they may even met with me. That's how desperate they were. And then in 2012, remember this, Clinton, Panetta, Petraeus, and Dempsey recommend to the administration that we need to arm the Syrian moderate rebels robustly and train them. The President said no. And that is a competent security team making that recommendation, in my judgment. In 2013, as a result of crossing the chemical line, the chemical red line, we did not take the action which if we had taken it, we would have shut down Assad's air power. And what did we get for that? Syria still has chemical production capability. Syria still has chemical weapons. Admittedly, nothing on the scale that they did have, but we said they would never get rid of all of that. I believe those decisions were largely driven by the Iranian nuclear deal, that we did not want to disrupt it. And it's still driving our policy in the Middle East. It is that decision that has lost our allies' confidence in the region, in us, and to this day, they're not convinced. Even right now as we're speaking, they are not convinced that the United States of America is serious about going after ISIS. And that's out of their mouths. That's what they believe, that we are not serious. And what they have seen is the intensity of the U.S. effort for 3 years has been about trying to establish a strategic alliance with Iran, and the vehicle to do that is a nuclear weapons deal. And the price that has caused us is pretty significant.
Thank you, General. Chair recognizes Chairman Royce.
General, I think there's another casualty in terms of that deference